So on Tuesday, we had a very lacquer discussion about addiction on the radio. And then yesterday, you didn't see me, but you saw a lot of people here walking around, right? And the reason wasn't here is because there's a lot of people were here walking around. Because when they're here and they're walking around and they start talking all the cuck, then I can't keep my mouth shut, you see, and it's a problem. So my primary argument, and we've got a doctor here, he'll be able to tell you, is, first of all, when your own facilities are in the condition they're in, I don't know where you found the wherewithal to come and tell me how to run my facility. You know what I mean? So it's like, let's say, a doctor or an administrator of, let's say, Kopanang Hospital coming to tell an administrator of Netcare how to run his hospital. Do you understand what I'm saying? Listen, but hang on. I think come here and work here for a while so that you can see how it's actually done and then go back. And that's my contention, in that I don't keep my mouth shut when these types of things are going down, So I've been requested by my staff and the board to not be available when those people come here. So apparently they were asking after me yesterday, but I was lucky that I had other things I wanted to do that I don't get time to do, which I went and did, and I didn't have to be here. So great. Having said that, everything went pretty well, actually very, very well. There were a couple of minor issues. I don't know, a tap leaking and a geyser leak that they weren't happy with. That the state engineers and architects that were here prior to them seemed to be relatively okay with, but the social workers were now the experts in building and civil engineering and architecture. But we'll sort it out. They're minor issues. In terms of, and I want to just say that the records on file and all our paperwork and admin was 100%. So I can draw a parallel, okay? Again, the places where they found fault was where recovering addicts work, and the places where they found no fault is where no recovering addicts work. So just give that a thought. You understand what I'm saying? So it's just something that you need to look at. I'm not specifically pointing fingers at people, but I am pointing fingers at people, If you want to, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, We've got people here from all different levels of industry. So, like if you're in building, okay, you can go, like I did aluminium and glass, we've got Rich here who's a carpenter and that. If you go in and you've got to put in 50 cabinets in kitchens on a fresh site. So they build townhouses, they give you the plan, you go and you build according to that plan, right? And you got to adjust your fitting because the walls are never straight, okay? The floors are never completely even. Do you understand that? So you got to adjust on the fly, right? And before you go, you give your quote and then they give you a deposit so that you can buy your materials and what, right? And then you go with your materials and you build these things. Then you're waiting now for your balance of your money, which in aluminium, when I was in it, we would get a 70% down payment, which covered all my costs, right? But your profit is in 30%. That's where your profit lies. So you don't eat until you get that 30%. You can't service grow your business without the 30% from all the jobs that you're doing, right? And you can't do the things you want to do, like us, ride dirt bikes and all that, because you need that 30% to pay yourself, okay? And then you'll get there and then they'll tune out. Here's your snag list before you get your draw, right? And then they pull out a Bible, right? And they tune unit 1 this, unit 5 that, unit 6 that. And then and that's more cost because now your oaks have to come back to site. You've got to pay them to be on site to fix those snags. So when you come there and you check their work to start with, you want to make sure that you've got the best fitters, you've got the best that understand the game, because they're going to fit and build the right way so that your snag list isn't as big so that you can get your money faster. You understand? Whereas here, or the way you think, good enough is good. Good enough for me is just good enough. Because you got no skin in the game. But if you don't learn here that good enough is not just good enough, because other people are going to come and inspect your work. Wherever you go in life, someone is going to inspect your work. If you're selling cell phones for Cell C from a shop in the mall, if you don't sell bigger, better, and greater than the oak next to you, and someone else applies for your position, you're going to lose your position. If they tell you sell 10 cell phones a day, or whatever it is, right, and you sell 10 cell phones a day, but the oak next to you is selling 18 cell phones a day, even though he also only has to sell 10. And there's an oak at another shop selling 15, and another oak at another shop selling 27, and another. Good enough is just not good enough, brother. You're going to lose that position. Because the following month, they're going to see what the average is of what oaks are selling, and they're going to up the margin and the target. And you've fallen into the rut of just 10, wherever you've been in your life. And you're going to fail. And you're going to lose your position. You're going to lose your job. And then you're going to try and apply somewhere else, and they want references, and they're going to find. These days, they actually vet the people they employ, because they understand primarily the level of addiction in the country. Even now, I've checked some bank, I've seen it with my own eyes, some bank applications for loans. Have you got a history of mental illness or addiction?
Really?
Yeah, but. Yeah. They can't specifically check that, all right? But they want to know, because do you know how many addicts go and take out, well, back in the day, I don't know what accounts there are now for clothing, but in my day, Edgar's accounts, and buy all kinds of shit from Edgar's and just never pay it, or go and buy a car and then flog the car to the flipping dealers. The dealers pull it across the border and then go report it stolen 2 days after it's gone already. The banks are onto all this stuff. So, and then they phone and they try to find their car, and then the oak's mother phones, he had a problem with addiction and we don't know where the car went. He might have sold it for drugs and da-da-da. And then they've got to try and recoup that money, and they can't find the addict, because the addict is bouncing from rehab to rehab to rehab, is unemployed, owns nothing, has nothing. How do they get their money back? So now they're starting to want to know, do you have a history of mental disorder? I've seen it once, to be honest with you. Mental disorders or substance abuse issues. They want to know, because it's costing people money. And people don't want to employ recovering addicts, because recovering addicts go a certain amount of time, they do well, they come out of rehab, they're on fire, they're ready to rock and roll, they burn, flipping white, thrusters are going, boosters are going, and then 6 months down the line, they lose traction, and then they go back into their addictions. And then they start stealing from the companies. So people have learned, right at the beginning of this thing, when I started going to rehab, the percentage of addicts was very small versus the percentage of the population. It was negligible. You could write it off. But now we're sitting in a country where they say up to 15% of our population is addicted to substances. 15%. That translates to nearly 7 million people that are addicted. And this is from the United Nations. Based on our stats, because us as a rehab, the registered treatment facility, every 3 months we have to submit paperwork. How many people have been through your doors? How many on this drug? How many on that drug? What is your primary drug of use? Da-da-da-da-da-da. How many people are back for multiple times? They don't ask for names and all of that. They just want to know numbers. And then we have to send that through. Then all those rehabs compile. Then they send it to National. National puts it together. They give a copy to the United Nations. And then the United Nations develops a overall, what do they call it? Report. They call it the United Nations Report on Drugs and Alcohol Abuse. And then every country gets an idea of what their problem is because the United Nations compiles this thing. And we've got a big problem in this country, and the financial institutions and employers are cottoning on to the issue. To the point where Jan will tell you, we're getting more and more calls from companies. More and more calls. We need you to implement programs here. We need you to implement drug awareness. Loyiso and Samora have just been doing a thing with Jan at Linker Meets. Doing awareness, doing testing, adjusting employment contracts with anti-substance abuse policies in your employment contract now, in order that they can limit the damage to themselves. If you were someone or if you are someone that's involved with drugs, they have a certain protocol that you've signed now when you sign into the company. And you're so happy to get the job, you just sign it. You don't read what you're signing. Where they are now free in terms of what their responsibilities are to you should you turn out to be a drug addict. So you've got to understand these things. You've got to understand these realities. And while you're here, you need to practice being the absolute best you can be so that when you go out there, you can be better than the rest out there. Because what you must understand this clearly today. When you walk out of these gates, you are going into a competition. It's a competition. You are competing with the rest of your population, nationally and internationally. And you are competing for the basics of life. Food, water, clothing, and dwelling. That's what you're competing for. And if you can't compete at a level that is the same as someone else or better, you will either then fall outside of what society deems and you will become above. Because you can't compete. And then you have to resort to crime and all those things to stay alive. But not even addiction, just to stay alive. And you will eventually get caught and you will eventually then go to jail. And that's what jail really is. Jail is actually a bunch of people together that cannot compete in normal civil society. That's what it is. They're kept away from society because they're not contributing to society in any way or in any form. In fact, they're taken out of society because they're robbing, stealing, and plundering what other people are working for. It's not fair. All right? This is truly a fact. It's not fair that a group of the population has to work like slaves. Because it doesn't matter any way you slice it. The economic system is a system of slavery. Whether it's socialist, Marxist, whether it's capitalist, whatever it is, it's a system of slavery. Before you get X, you have to do Y. Simple. You cannot buy a house today unless you take a bond. The minute you take the bond, you've got to service that debt. In order to service that debt, you have to have a job that pays money because that debt requires money. So if you want a house, you've got to pay the bank to lend you the money to pay the house. So you have to go to work if you want a house. If you're not buying a house and you're paying rent, the landlord wants his rent every month. What? Every month, if you don't have a debit order or you're paying rent by cash and you don't pay that rent, and depending where you stay, you'll either get a nice guy with an eviction order or you'll get a couple of thugs with gold chains asking you to leave the premises. What? And then you go back to wherever it is. Some of you are still living with your parents and you're 100 years old. Do you think it's fair that these people that are supposed to be going on pension, that have worked their whole lives, now have to work an extra 10, 15 years because you now want to lie on the couch? Is that right? Do you think? Do you think it's fair that 10% of the population must work like dogs and pay tax so that the rest of the population can claim SASSA? No. Is that fair? What? It's not fair, brother. Do you think it's fair? Look at what's happening with Operation Dudula now around the country, right? Okay, what are they fighting about? They're fighting about the fact that the South African population can't get medical treatment, proper medical treatment, and can't get access to medicines because foreigners are flooding across the border and clogging up the clinics and the public hospitals. That's what they're fighting about. It's not fair that South Africans who live, and some of them contribute but can't afford medical aids, cannot get treatment because foreigners who don't work are filling up the medical system. That's their role. Now you make your own decision whether they're right or whether they're wrong, or whether the methods they're employing are right or wrong. But the premise is correct. So in South Africa right now, more and more people, working people, people who pay tax, business owners, are stepping back now and getting together and saying, all right, what we're going to plan now is a tax revolution. What's a tax revolution? We are collectively, as the working South African class, not going to pay tax for 6 months. People are talking about it very seriously, and you've got oaks like Rob Herself that are pushing it. But yeah, you will save a lot, absolutely. But who's going to then cuck off? Because it's my tax that pays Cyril Ramaphosa, but it's my tax that pays SASSA. It's my tax that's keeping the government hospital open. It's my tax that's paying the policeman's salary. It's my tax that's fixing the road. It's my tax that's putting water in your tap. What? And if me and all my mates who pay tax decide, which is the whole of the working South African middle class and upper class, decide we're not paying tax, then you're not going to have a hospital, you're not going to have water, you're not going to have SASSA, and you're not going to have a road to drive on. And the government is going to be unable to pay its overinflated civil debt. Because we've got the biggest civil service in the world. Over 1 million people in our civil service who do the least work. Of which I watched this morning, 35% of that civil service doesn't even exist. They're ghost workers. I'm paying people that don't even exist. They only exist on paper. And their money is being paid into crooked people's accounts. Ghost workers, they call them. And civil society, the oaks that work and build and want to grow, they've had enough. They've had enough of it. You refused to go to school and get an education. You refused. Now you're sitting at home, waiting for your money to come into your SASSA account that I'm working to pay you to do nothing. You're having 10 children because the government is paying you per child. But you're not looking after those children. I am. And people like me. And you're living off that on purpose. And so we have cottoned onto that and we say, no. We're not. People that really need it, that can't help themselves. People with disabilities. People with chronic diseases that they've got no control over, like cancer and certain diabetes and these types of things. Sure, help those people. Absolutely. Orphans, help them. Old people, help them. Absolutely. But people who refuse to work, that are able, I can't tell you how many times I stop at a traffic light and I comes to my window, oh, give me R5. And I should have been with me, will tell you this is the gospel truth. I open my window, I tune I do this. I tune him, I promise you, I tune him, do this. The oak tunes like this. I tune, do this. He goes like that. I tune, look here in the car, he looks in the car, I tune, do this. He goes like this. I tune, go mow a lawn, but. Go mow a lawn, brother. Especially when I can identify off the bat that the oak trying to smuggle the money off me is a junkie. Trying to get another 20 rand to go buy another bag. Or a hit, or whatever you oaks buy for 20 rand these days. Right? Why must we keep paying for you? Give me the reason. You understand? And this is some of the truth I want to speak to you today. Is that you can go through life like that, living on the fringes of society. But all the things you've ever dreamed about having, you will never have. When you see that out driving past in his Range Rover Sport, supercharged, that's all you'll ever do is watch how I drive past in one of those. Why? Because you don't want to do more than what is required. Even criminals that have reached that place of being super wealthy have done more than what the other criminal is willing to do to get there. And most of those criminals that are at the top level of crime don't do drugs. They sell drugs. But you that thinks you're going to be the ultimate gangster, but you're chopping lawns here in your shack, forget about it. What? Forget about it. Because the criminals at the top level are not going to trust you. Even criminals don't trust drug addicts. What? I know that for a fact. I know that for a fact. And so you've got to start thinking, what are you going to do to make yourself marketable and valuable to whatever aspect of life you're going to insert yourself into? Because if you can't make yourself marketable and valuable, you're not going to be able to compete in the competition, what we often call the rat race. And it is. My grandfather bought a house. It took him 30 years to pay that house off. He paid it off and then he died. But for 30 years he had a home to live in. He worked for the South African Railways. He climbed all the way to the top. Chief Civil Engineer of the Railways. And then when he got there, he got sick. He went on pension and he died. But the point is, he had a purpose, a job, a home. He raised 2 kids. He raised a grandkid. He lived his life. He accomplished the goals that he wanted to accomplish in his goals by operating within the parameters that are required for a society to function. You can't expect to function outside of society and then want the benefits of being within society. It's as simple as that. Society will reject you. And society, that's why you're sitting here today, that's why the prisons are full, has rejected you. I want you to know that. But society is very forgiving. That's the good thing. Certain portions of society. Other portions, not so much. But most of society has figured out that, you know what, that if you really put your mind to it, that you should be given another chance, another bite at the apple. And most of society will give you that opportunity if you have rehabilitated your ways to the point of understanding that you are willing to function within the parameters of this society. They will say to you, all right, brother, come and give it another shot. Come and compete with us. Join our business. Join our corporation. Join our ministry. Join our NGO. Join wherever that you feel that you're going to fit in to best compete for your plate of food, your place to stay, the clothes on your back, and the water that you need to survive. And that's the realities of what you need to start understanding, is that it's not the responsibility of the government primarily. Because this is what I keep seeing amongst South Africans. They seem to think that it's the government's responsibility to make sure they have all those things that I've just told you about to survive. It's not the government's responsibility. The government's responsibility is to make sure that there's an environment within which you can attain those things. That is their only responsibility, not to give you those things. In other words, this is what we're fighting about in our own country. You're not providing the platform for us to be able to provide for ourselves. You're killing business. You're killing everything through your greed and lust and corruption. This is why you must go. Because foreign businesses are pulling out. Every foreign business that pulls out, because there's not a South African to take his place. So when Mercedes goes, there's no South African car manufacturer that can replace Mercedes-Benz to employ the people that Mercedes-Benz used to employ. So those people become government problem, which becomes my problem because my tax now goes up because there's another 400,000 people that the government wants to feed that there's no tax. And those people are now no longer either paying tax because they're out of work. So they're not providing a platform where we can operate within in order to provide for ourselves, and even more than provide for ourselves, succeed and grow and leave a proper legacy for our kids and expand our country further. They're throttling it through ideology and greed. That is what we're fighting about. And the way they're taking your eyes off that, look what Nelson Mandela did for you. Well, I don't know. If you look at the country today, what did Nelson Mandela really do for you? I'm looking at this young man here. He's studying his ass off. I'm sure he wants to go to varsity afterwards, get a tertiary education. Maybe not varsity. Maybe he wants to get a technical diploma or something, right? There's 300,000 students right now with degrees. Degrees, bro. There's doctors in this country that can't find work. What? So what has freedom really brought? Nothing. Not because freedom is not desired. Freedom is absolutely desired for every man, woman, and child. But if freedom is not applied, and a different type of slavery takes root, the slavery of corrupt elites, then there's no point to the freedom. I speak to people, Richard will tell you, JP will tell you, Axura, dirt bikes will tell you, bro. We ride in crazy places for white people. We go where no white people go. Because white people are scared to go to the hood. But we ride in those places. We're often in the middle of Soshanguve. We're often in the middle of Soweto. We're often in the middle of Lesotho. We're often in Swaziland. We're often in the mountains and hills of the Drakensberg. Often. And there we find black people. And we stop at their shops, and a lot of the guys we ride with drink. We stop at those taverns and shebeens, and the oaks have a drink, and we're surrounded by black people, and we interact. And what I'm hearing more and more, something I never ever heard from older black people, from older people that suffered this thing, that are saying, we'd rather go back to apartheid. More and more and more. Because even though we couldn't vote, and even though we couldn't own land, and even though we struggled to formulate businesses and whatever we were prevented from, we couldn't go to the beach, we didn't have money. Even now, we can go to the beach, we can go to the movies, we can go to Wimpy, we can go to all these places, but we don't have the money to do it. We barely have money for bread. One loaf of bread must last us a week. So what's the point of the freedom of all these things if we can't afford it? Do you understand? In apartheid, we weren't allowed to do those things, but we had money. We could go to varsity, we could go to school, we could go to the hospital. We had these things. We didn't need the money because these things were provided to us properly. Now we've got the freedom of all these things, but we don't have the opportunity to earn the money to enjoy our freedom. So in fact, we're in a worse slavery economically than we were in a racial slavery under apartheid. Imagine. Now you've got to understand, you're in the middle of the hills, in the middle of nowhere, and someone can articulate that to you. How smart these people are. You understand? But these people that are keeping you under are keeping you trapped in ideological thinking in order to retain power for themselves. And it's a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just here. It's a worldwide phenomenon. We see Europe is busy going through the same thing. Where Europeans, people born in Europe, people who live in Italy and Spain and these countries, can't afford to buy property in their own country because of the way the government is throttling them. And we see now revolutions are actually breaking out in Europe. More and more. Same thing is starting to happen in Australia. Same thing was starting in America, but Trump is pretty much getting that shit under control. The only place in Europe where you can go and live a proper life now is the Balkans and Poland. Eastern Europe. Why? Because they've already been through that. They've already experienced communism. They've already experienced the hammer of Islam on their head. And they've rejected it outright. Through war and conflict. And they're not going to allow it back. Now, if I were to move to Europe, I'd definitely Serbia, Poland, Croatia even, Montenegro. Those places are good to go and live. They're safe. People understand. They've been through this. They've been through what we only starting to get into now. But you've got to understand these realities if you want to go into the world and do something with your life. Or you can choose not to do that and stay an addict forever. And one day, just before you die, hopefully if you don't die from an overdose or some drug-related crime and killing or stabbing or lose your mind because of addiction and end up in some institution, one day when you get to an age where you can think about things, you're going to look back on your life, you're going to remember this day at Walking with Winners, and you're going to say these words: if only I'd listened to that Bali on that day. I wish he were here now that I could talk to him. I'm telling you. You've experienced, let me tell you, in addiction, you have only experienced the worst of life. Please trust me when I tell you that. You look at what other people are doing and you think that is an exceptionally difficult life. Let me tell you, everyday life, normal life can be exceptionally boring at times. The routine can grind you down. That's why we ride bikes. That's why we go scuba diving. To break that cycle of boredom and up in the morning, off to work, deal with Richard's cuck. You understand? Whatever it is, you know, he's just sitting closest to me right now. You understand what I'm saying? But you know what it is? Tomorrow, if it's not Richard, it'll be one of you or something else. It's just that daily grind you have to go through, and you have to do it, primarily because it's your job, but also you've chosen this job, you've decided to do this, that's what you do. But every now and then you get a little break and you go and flip, and we do it on Saturdays. We jump on that dirt bike and try to kill ourselves. That's what we try and do. We literally try and get that adrenaline rush to try and flip and just break that monotony of everyday life. Because it does. It gets boring and irritating. And it's very easy to give up as a recovering addict in the beginning when you don't yet see the results and fruits. You don't get that lacquer new bike straight away. You don't get that lacquer new car straight away. You don't get your own spot straight away. You have to work towards it. And sometimes that working towards it, you just sometimes feel like, yes, what's the point? Because you had a certain goal by a certain date, and then you see that date is moving further and further away. And you think, to hell with it. But I want to tell you, 90% of people fail on the precipice of the breakthrough. If they'd have just gone another 6 months, another year, they would have hit the jackpot, bro. And things would have started cruising. You know, and cruising doesn't mean no more problems. Cruising just means you're at a point where things are turning over to the point where you're starting to realize your dreams and aspirations in your life. And like where I started that little portion, for a recovering addict, normal life is actually very piss. Very piss. Because there's rules and regulations that if you stick to them, shit happens. Shit happens. And it progresses. I mean, you check Nandi. Nandi's never been an addict. Her husband was on the program, right? She's been working here a long time, bro. Couple days ago, she managed to get finance on a lacquer little car. She's been driving that piece of shit we've all been seeing her, right? She went out of her own. She got the finance. They approved her finance. If she'd have given up 3 months ago, 6 months ago, she would never have got to that car. And it's not easy. She's got a recovering addict as a husband. She's got a small child to raise. She's got to put up with my cuck here every day. She's got to put up with your cuck here every day. She doesn't earn massive amounts of money, but she earned enough to be able to get the finance for that car. And that's what she wanted. She always wanted to have a decent car for herself. Now she's achieved that. Now she'll move to the next goal, whatever her next goal was. But it's been difficult, I'm telling you now. But not as difficult as what your addiction has been. If you look at your addiction, right, and what you've put into it, what have you put into your addiction? Every single thing. Relationships gone. Jobs gone. Every cent you get, straight to the mirt. Home gone. Right? Everything, you've put it, I worked it out. In my addiction, I spent more or less between 7 and 10 million rand just on drugs. Just drugs, but, and that was at a basic. I didn't even go max. I did it on minimums. I worked it on minimums. If I did it on maximums, it would be 3 times that. In 16 years, 7 to 10 million rand. That doesn't include rehabs, because most of the rehabs helped me mahala anyway. That doesn't include my rent. That doesn't include cigarettes. That doesn't include... I'm talking specifically crack and everything that went with crack. 10 bar in 16 years. And what did I have to show for that 10 bar? Now imagine I put the same effort into a career. And I earned 10 bar in my career in 16 years. Hold on now. Different story. There's tangible results, my friend. I can show you my 10 bar that I made as an addict right now. We can drive to Glen Vista and I'll show you one of the dealers that helped spend my 10 bar. He's got a 4 million rand house and a McLaren 720p standing there. An RG. Who I met when he arrived here from flipping Nigeria and his pluckies, those front Naji pluckies. 10 years later, he was a multi-millionaire and I was still a junkie. Think about it. What have the rewards been for what you've given everything for your addiction, and what has your reward been? And I want to say to you, if you do the same thing and you work as hard at your life and your career as you did at your addiction, you will see tangible and measurable and awesome results in 10 years from today. Amen. Amen. All right. And that is some of the truth I wanted to speak to you today, because the scripture for today would have been, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. And obviously the Bible is speaking to Jesus Christ as that truth. But I wanted to speak to you about that truth coming from real life, tangible, what you can do to get your life better truths. You're failing because you're not trying. And if you're trying incorrectly. There's absolutely no way you're going to reach those results and be an addict. You got to choose. Do you want the drugs or do you want the life? I said it to Richard this morning. Do you want the truth, the drugs, or do you want the life? And based on that decision, you must then go balls to the wall for the thing you choose. You've already chosen drugs. You went balls to the wall for drugs, and check what the results have been. Now maybe it's time to try the other alternative and see if I'm wrong. But do it with the same fervor, the same passion, the same lust that you did for drugs. Do for your life and see what the results will be. I'm telling you, you're unstoppable. I'm telling you. But you can't have both. You can't have both, brother. Understand that. You know? I was just looking across the room now. And the guy that I'm going to mention now will know who I'm talking about. I'm not talking about him, but I'm talking about someone we both know. That is supposed to be on the board of directors for a massive company in Johannesburg. But because he chooses addiction over going balls to wall for life, the guy who's supposed to be MD and heir to this dynasty, it's a dynasty, all right, is typing invoices in some back room because he refuses to engage. He's next in line to be the big boss, but he'll never be the big boss, because when he was supposed to be working towards becoming the big boss and learning to be the big boss, he chose crack, heroin, crystal, the good times, the joy. He didn't invest in his life. He invested in the drugs. And now he's at a point where he should be chilling and he's an employee. Think about that. Make your choice. But whatever your choice is, understand that if you choose the drugs, don't complain 10, 20 years down the line, if you're lucky enough to survive that long, that it's someone else's fault that you are in the hole. You'll see, last word, successful people unlike myself, because I give Jesus Christ and God all the glory for where I'm at today. Right? That's who I give glory, right? But successful people, generally speaking, in the business world, politics, they blame no one for getting to the top. They don't say, yeah. Let's use old Cyril Ramaphosa as an example. It's flippin' PW Botha's fault that I'm president of South Africa. If it wasn't for PW Botha, I'd never be here. You don't hear that, but if you speak to Uncle Cyril, he's going to tune you. Listen here, brother. Do you know what I've been through and the cuck I've had to eat to become president of this country? I got here through hard work, through loyalty, whatever his story is going to be, but it's going to boil down to, I did it. Me. And then you go vice versa. And he might give some people credit for helping him along the way. Comrades in the ANC, whatever it is. Absolutely, People helped me, but I did it. I went to every meeting. I ate the kak. Whatever I did to get where I am. I'm a billionaire. I'm president of South Africa. Well done to me. Most successful people, right? Go speak to the beggar on the street. Or the addict. And hear why he's failing. It's never me. It's everyone else. That's the difference. That's the difference between people who fail and people who succeed. People who succeed trust in themselves, trust in their ability, and they flip and do what they need to do, and they climb up. By hook or by crook, they get where they want to go. And when they get there, they say, yes, I made it. And people who fail, it's my mother's fault, it's the government's fault, it's I didn't get an opportunity, whatever their story is, but there's a million stories, but. And I see it every day. Just in our group that we ride with, there's 3 or 4 oaks that are recovering from addiction issues that have built phenomenal businesses coming out of addiction. And everyone goes to them and says, yes, bro, how'd you do it? And oaks will say like this, like that, and then they shake the oak's hand and they say, well done, brother. Yeah, that's amazing what you've accomplished. Who's accomplished? You've accomplished. And then you guys see the oak on the street who's never even tried. And no one shakes his hand and says, yes, this is a beautiful street corner, lovely. You're really pulling off that addict vibe, brother. Congratulations on what you've achieved.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah? No? So the keys are in your hand. You decide which door you're going to unlock. But whichever door you walk through, understand, it's your call, ultimately. All right? Sharp. I think this thing wasn't on, eh? Are you certain?